The referee's whistle for the second half was still hanging in the air, that thin silver sound cutting through 80,000 throats, when my phone buzzed against my leg for the 9th time in 4 minutes. And I finally looked down at a screen full of words that didn't make sense. Civic alert, Bellevue. Shelter in place. Avoid I-90 and SR 520. Do not approach individuals exhibiting signs of distress. I remember reading that last line twice. Signs of distress. I read it a third time, actually, my thumb hovering over the screen, the words refusing to settle into any shape I recognized. What kind of emergency alert tells 80,000 people not to help someone who's distressed? Every alert I'd ever gotten in my life had been the opposite: help each other. Check on your neighbors. Look out for the vulnerable. This one read like it had been written by somebody with their hands shaking. I showed it to my brother Desh, who was crushing the last of a stadium pretzel between his molars, salt on his fingers, mustard on the corner of his mouth, and he leaned over, squinted at the brightness of the screen against the afternoon glare, and said, "Cell towers are fried. Everybody's phone is spazzing. Mine sent me the same thing 3 times. He wiped his hand on his jeans. You know how it gets in here. And I did know how it got in there. So I let his answer land soft and easy on top of my unease, the way you let a lid settle on a pot. Then Belgium threaded a ball through our back line, a pass so clean it looked rehearsed. And the whole stadium came up out of their seats like a single animal. One great intake of breath, and then a groan of 80,000 people who'd seen the danger a half-second too late. And I stood too, because that's what you do. Because your body goes with the crowd before your mind gets a vote. And the alert slid up and off my screen, and I let it go. That was the mistake. Not a big dramatic one, a small one. The kind 80,000 people made at the exact same moment, all of us roaring at a soccer ball while the city on the other side of the lake was already coming apart, quietly, room by room, street by street, the way a building fills with gas before anyone smells it. Before I take you into the rest of it, I want to say something plainly. Thank you to everyone who keeps coming back to these stories, and if this is your first time here, welcome. If grounded survival stories like this are your kind of thing, subscribe and leave a comment. It genuinely helps this channel keep going. Now, let me get back to what happened, because the strangest part isn't that the outbreak reached us. It's how long we sat there and cheered while it did. My name's Owen Reddick. I'm 43, and I fit gas lines and boilers for commercial buildings across King County, which means I spend my days thinking about pressure, flow, and what happens when a system that everyone trusts quietly fails. I've stood in a lot of basements and mechanical rooms with my hand flat against a pipe, feeling for the tremor that says something's wrong before the gauge ever shows it. I mention that because it turns out to be the only useful thing I know. I don't own a gun. I've never punched anyone in my adult life. I couldn't tell you the first thing about tactics or fighting or any of the stuff the movies say you need. But I understand how a city breathes, how the water and the gas and the power and the cars and the people all move through it in currents that you stop noticing until one of them stops. And I understand that when the breathing stops, it doesn't stop all at once. It stops in sections. A valve closes here, a line ruptures there. And the part of the system that's still working has no idea the rest is already dead. I was at Seattle Stadium that Saturday with my brother Desh Deshawn, but nobody's called him that since he was 10, and my son, Teo. Teo's 16, quiet in the way that used to worry me before I understood it was just him watching everything and deciding what was worth saying. He'd been like that since he was small. The kid at the birthday party standing at the edge of the room mapping it before he'd commit to the fun. His mother, Carys, was home in West Seattle with a migraine she'd had for 2 days, One of those brutal ones that made light feel like a knife and sound feel like a fist. She'd waved us off that morning from the front step in her robe with a bag of ice pressed over her eyes. One hand up in a limp little goodbye. Go. Yell for me. That wave is the last normal thing I have of her. The ordinary domestic smallness of it. A woman in a robe sending her men off to a game. And I didn't know it then. So I didn't hold on to it the way I would if I could go back and stand on that step one more time. We had seats in the 200 level, east side, high enough to see the whole pitch laid out below us like a green table and the gray shine of Elliott Bay past the lip of the upper deck. USA versus Belgium, round of 16. A match the whole country had been circling for weeks. The kind of game where strangers talk to you in line for coffee about the back four. The stadium was a wall of red, white, and blue. Face paint and flags and foam fingers. A guy 3 rows down who'd painted his entire bald head like a soccer ball. Black and white pentagons meticulous across his scalp. And he kept turning around so people could photograph it, grinning, loving it. A man having the best day of his year. It was loud in the way that gets into your chest, the way you feel in your sternum before you hear it in your ears. When the anthem played, Teo put his hand over his heart without being told. And I caught Desh watching him do it. And neither of us said anything, but we both felt the same thing. That private ache a man gets watching a kid he loves become a person. The first half was scoreless and tense, the kind of half where the whole crowd leans into every touch. Belgium had the better of it early, quick and patient, moving the ball like they had all day. And then the US settled in and started to press, closing space, forcing turnovers, and the noise came up in waves. Every near miss sent a ripple through the crowd that you could feel travel through the concrete under your feet, up through the seat, into your spine. I remember thinking it was one of those matches that stays nothing right up until it detonates, that it was building toward one moment that would decide everything. And I was right about that, just not the way I meant. The detonation didn't come from the pitch. The alert started around the 35th minute. Not just mine, Desh's went off. Then the guy with the soccer ball head slapped at his pocket. Then the woman behind us in a Pulisic jersey who kept saying, "The heck is this?" to her friend, holding her phone at arm's length like it had bitten her. Phones buzzing in pockets all over our section, like a swarm of insects settling into the seats, a low, uneven hum of vibration under the crowd noise. But the signal was garbage. It always is in there. 80,000 people, all trying to post the same replay, upload the same photo, text the same group chat, and the towers choke, and the stadium's own network gives up the ghost by halftime. Every single game I'd watched it happen at every match I'd ever been to. So when the alerts came through mangled and out of order, half a sentence arriving after its own ending, when a text from Carys arrived showing a send time from 20 minutes earlier, everybody's brain filed it under the same folder without even opening the file. Technical problems, bad reception, the thing we'd all learned to expect and shrug off. The brain is a lazy sorter. It loves a folder it already knows. Carys's text, when I finally read it in full, said, "Something's going on in Bellevue. News is weird. Are you seeing this?" I typed back, "Are you okay?" and hit send. And the little wheels spun and never turned into the check mark that means it arrived. Just spun, that small gray circle going around and around. And I watched it for a second, and then I put the phone away. The match was more real than the phone. That's the honest truth of it. And I've made my peace with saying it out loud, even though it shames me. The thing right in front of you always feels more real than the warning coming from far away. And that instinct, the one that says the tiger in the grass, matters more than the storm on the horizon, has kept humans alive around campfires for 100,000 years. And it is exactly the instinct that gets you killed in a stadium with your phone buzzing in your pocket. At halftime, I went for the bathroom and beers, the eternal father's errand, working my way up the aisle against the flow. And that's when I started noticing things I couldn't file away so easily. The concourse was its usual halftime river. People shoulder to shoulder, the smell of fried food and spilled beer and sunscreen. Kids being towed by wrists, a long line snaking out of every restroom. But the TVs, the ones bolted up in the corners that usually loop highlights and beer ads and shots of the crowd doing the wave, had cut to a local news feed. No sound over the roar of the concourse. Just closed captions, scrolling too fast to fully read. White text on black bars stuttering across the bottom of the screen. And the picture above the captions was a helicopter shot of a multi-car pileup on a freeway. Cars stopped at angles across all lanes, doors hanging open like the cars were surprised, a jackknifed something in the middle of it. And people, this is the part that stuck a hook in me and started to pull people not standing near the crash, the way people always do at a crash. Everyone was running away from it, down the grassy embankment, over the concrete median, spilling out in every direction but toward the wreck. In 15 years of driving King County freeways, I'd never once seen a crash where nobody gathered. Somebody always gathers. There's always the guy on his phone filming, the woman climbing out to help, the little knot of gawkers slowing traffic for a mile. Nobody gathers away from a crash. That's not a thing people do. And here was a whole freeway of people doing it. I stood there with 2 plastic cups of beer going warm in my hands, the foam sliding down my knuckles, and I read the caption as it scrolled. Bellevue police requesting mutual aid from, and it cut off. The screen replaced by a graphic that said, "We are experiencing technical difficulties," in that flat blue institutional font. And then the feed came back mid-sentence, with a reporter whose face was doing something I didn't like at all. I've watched a lot of news. Reporters have a face for tragedy, a practiced, solemn thing, the eyebrows drawn together, the voice lowered, the professional grief they can put on and take off. This wasn't that face. This was a person who had stopped performing entirely and was just scared. Eyes flicking off camera to somebody I couldn't see, a little too much white showing. And the caption running under her said only, "Advised to remain indoors," and before it froze, the picture stuttering and locking up with her mouth half open. A stadium employee, a heavyset kid maybe 20 in a yellow polo with a lanyard and a radio, was standing near the TV with the radio held up against his ear, his head tilted, listening hard with one finger pressed to the other ear to block the concourse noise. And I watched his expression change while he listened to something. It happened slow, the way a face changes when the words coming in don't match the world you're standing in. First, a small frown, then a stillness, then a kind of draining, the color and the ease going out of it. He lowered the radio slowly, the way you set something down when you've forgotten you're holding it. And he looked out at the crowd streaming past him toward the bathrooms and the beer stands. All these happy people in face paint and jerseys. And he had the look of a man who's just been handed a secret he doesn't know what to do with. A secret too big for a 20-year-old in a yellow polo. I almost asked him, "I want you to understand how close I came." I took a step. I opened my mouth. "Hey, you okay? What's going on?" And then the halftime buzzer sounded through the concourse, that long, flat electronic note. And the crowd surged as one body back toward the seating bowl. And I got carried with it. 2 beers held up over my head like an offering, back to my brother and my son. And I told myself I'd check my phone again once we sat down. The kid in the yellow polo disappeared behind me into the crowd, and I never saw him again. And I've thought about him more than a man should think about a stranger. "You look weird," Desh said when I handed him his beer. Desh reads me better than anyone alive, always has. 6 years younger, built like the linebacker he'd been in high school, shoulders that don't quite fit through doorways. And he works logistics for the Port of Seattle, which means he spends his days moving steel containers around a yard the size of a small town, and knows to the hour how the whole region's supply chains flow. What comes in, what goes out, what's stacked where, how one delayed ship backs up 1,000 trucks. Between the two of us, we understood more about how Seattle actually functioned, the plumbing and the pressure and the flow of the thing, than most of the people responsible for running it. And I keep coming back to that, turning it over, because it didn't save us from anything. It just meant we understood, with terrible clarity, exactly what we were losing while we lost it. Knowledge isn't a shield. Sometimes it's just a better window onto the thing coming to kill you. "The news is showing a crash on 405, I said, sitting down, keeping my voice easy. "Everybody's running away from it." "So?" He took a long pull of his beer, eyes already back on the pitch where the teams were coming out for the second half. "So nobody runs away from a crash, Desh. People are moths. They flock to it. You know that. You've seen it. Somebody rear-ends somebody on the 5 and 40 people slow down to look." He chewed on that for a second, jaw working. And I watched him try to fit it into a shape that didn't ruin the afternoon. "Maybe there was a fire," he said finally. "People run from fire. Fuel spill, something's burning, everybody books it. Makes sense." And that was reasonable. It was a good, clean explanation. And I wanted it to be true so badly that I let it be true. I set it down over the wrongness like that lid on the pot again. And the referee's whistle went, and the second half kicked off, and the crowd came up loud. Around the 55th minute, the helicopters arrived. Not the news chopper that had been lazily circling since kickoff for the aerial beauty shots, the stadium glowing in the sun, the bay behind it. These were different, lower, faster, coming in from the east over the city and cutting straight across the open bowl of the stadium in a way that made people crane their necks and point up, distracted from the game for a second. 2 of them, close together, then a third trailing behind. No markings I could see, no news logos, no county seal, nothing. And they didn't circle, didn't hover, didn't do any of the things helicopters do when they're watching something. They crossed the airspace fast and low, and kept going west, toward the water, toward the open sound, in a dead straight line. And something about their speed and their heading felt wrong to me, the way a pipe feels wrong under my hand when the pressure's climbing. And I can't yet hear the leak, that low animal certainty in the body, before the mind has the words. Teo noticed them before I did, actually. He'd been quiet the whole match, watching more than cheering. But he tugged my sleeve and pointed up and said, "Those aren't news helicopters." Just that, flat, certain. He plays a lot of games where you have to notice things fast, read a screen, catch the movement at the edge, and I've learned over the years not to dismiss what he catches, because he catches things I miss. "Coast Guard, maybe," I said, offering it, wanting it. He shook his head, still watching them shrink toward the water. "Coast Guard's orange. Those are gray." And he was right. They were gray. Flat military gray, no color on them anywhere. And I didn't have anything to say to that, so I watched them disappear over the lip of the upper deck and told myself the World Cup drew all kinds of security. VIPs, dignitaries, that gray helicopters over a stadium during a global tournament meant nothing at all. I was getting good that afternoon at telling myself things meant nothing. I had a lot of practice packed into a short window. The U.S. had a corner in the 60th minute, and the whole place stood again. That single animal rise. And in the noise of it, I felt my phone buzz once, hard, a different pattern than a text, a long, deliberate pulse. I pulled it out. The screen was black except for a full bleed emergency banner, the kind that overrides everything you're doing, the kind you can't swipe away, can't dismiss, that just sits there until you acknowledge it. Wireless emergency alert. And then in flat government type, all caps, no punctuation wasted. Public health emergency. King County, avoid groups. Do not render aid to injured persons, seek secure shelter. More information at. And a URL that, when I tapped it with a thumb that had gone suddenly clumsy, spun and died. The connection strangled by 80,000 phones doing the same thing at the same instant. Do not render aid to injured persons. I read it, and the crowd roared around me for the corner, and I couldn't hear any of it. I have fixed emergency shutoffs and pressure relief systems and fail-safes my whole working life. Every one of them is built on a single principle. When something goes wrong, protect the people. Vent the pressure, cut the fuel, get the humans clear, help the injured. Every fiber of every emergency protocol ever written by anyone in any field is about helping the injured. That's the whole point of protocol. And this was the exact opposite. This was an instruction from people who had realized, and could not say plainly, that the injured were the danger. That helping was how you died. You don't write, do not render aid, unless aid has become the vector. I understood that in my gut before I understood it in my head, and my mouth went dry. I turned to Desh, and this time, I didn't soften it. Didn't lay it out easy. Didn't leave him room to say so. I held the phone up in his face until he read it, the banner filling the screen. His lips moved through the words, and I watched the joke he'd been about to make. He always has one. Loaded die in his throat, just go out like a snuffed match. He looked up from the phone to me, and for the first time all day, maybe the first time in years, my little brother looked at me the way he used to when we were kids, and something had gone wrong, and he was waiting for his big brother to tell him what to do. We need to leave, I said. Now, before everybody else figures it out at the same time. And that, more than the helicopters, more than the alert, is the thing I keep turning over at 3 in the morning. Because Desh looked around at 80,000 people who had no idea, at a match that was still scoreless and alive on a knife's edge, at a father 2 seats down, bouncing a toddler in a tiny USA jersey on his knee, at the guy with the soccer ball head, at the whole warm, loud, ordinary human ocean of it. And he said the most human thing possible, the thing I think almost anyone would have said. Owen, it's still 0-0. If we walk out now and it's nothing, we'll feel like idiots forever. He wasn't wrong to say it. That's what makes it so hard to be angry about, even now. That's the trap the whole day was built on. Every single instinct in that stadium was pulling the same direction. Stay. This is fine. The game's still on. The authorities have it handled. Look how many thousands of people are calm and happy and unbothered. 80,000 calm people is the most convincing argument in the world. It's more convincing than any alert, any caption, any gray helicopter. The crowd is its own kind of proof. And it takes a specific and slightly crazy kind of stubbornness or a specific and lucky kind of fear to stand up and walk against a current that strong when nothing you can actually see has gone wrong yet. To be the one weirdo climbing the stairs out while everyone else sits down. I looked at Teo. He was watching me, not the game, not the corner, not the 80,000 me. My face, reading it the way he reads everything. And whatever he saw there, made him reach down without a word and pick up his jacket from the back of his seat and hold it in his lap. That decided it more than anything Desh could have said. My kid was already moving. "We're going," I said to Desh. "You can come with us or you can meet us at the truck when the game's over. But Teo and I are going now." Desh held my eyes for a second, then swore under his breath and stood up. And I loved him for it. Getting out of a stadium seating bowl when 80,000 people want to stay is like trying to walk up a waterfall. We went up the concrete stairs against a thin trickle of people heading down to the bathrooms. And every few steps, somebody would glance at us like we were out of our minds to be leaving during a match this tight, this alive. A guy in a Marina jersey with a beer in each hand stepped aside to let us pass and said, "You'll miss the winner, man," and grinned wide, and I made myself grin back and shrug like a guy whose kid felt sick, because the last thing I wanted, the very last thing, was to be the man who started a panic in a crowd of that size. I understood even then, with the fear climbing my throat, that panic in an enclosed space with 80,000 bodies and too few exits would kill more people in 10 minutes than any outbreak. A crush, a stampede, people going down and not getting up. The human stampede that's killed more soccer fans over the years than any disease ever would. So we moved fast but calm, faces easy, no running. And I kept one hand on Teo's shoulder to steer him and one eye back on Desh, who'd fallen in behind us, but kept half turning toward the pitch like a compass needle pulled back to north, like he might change his mind and go back to his seat for the winner. The concourse was where the mask started to slip, where the ordinary Saturday began to show what was underneath it. The employee in the yellow polo was gone. I looked for him, and he wasn't there. In his place, at the top of the exit ramp, stood 2 Seattle police officers. And they weren't scanning the crowd the way cops scan a crowd for pickpockets and drunks and lost kids. They were positioned, set. They had their backs to the wall and their eyes moving with a purpose. And they were talking low and fast into the radios clipped at their shoulders, chins tucked down. And they had that particular stillness that trained people get in the last few seconds before everything moves, the coiled quiet of people who know something's coming and are waiting for the word. As we passed close, I heard one of them say, into his radio, "Hold the gates, or we're going to have a crush. They're saying do not open the gates until..." And then he felt me listening, the way you feel eyes. And he turned his whole body away from me and lowered his voice to nothing. "Do not open the gates." I filed that one carefully, because if they were talking about not opening the gates, it meant that somewhere up the chain, somebody was deciding whether to keep 80,000 people locked inside a sealed stadium, whether to trap us in here for our own good, or because there was nowhere safe to release us to, or both. And whichever way that decision broke, whatever the reasoning, I wanted my family on the outside of it when it landed. There's an old rule in my trade, one of the first things a good foreman ever teaches you. When you don't understand what a system is about to do, when the valves are moving and you can't read why, you get your hands clear of the moving parts. You step back. You don't reach in to find out. I wanted my hands, and my son, and my brother, clear of the moving parts of whatever this stadium was about to become. We found a section exit that hadn't been staffed up yet. No cop, no yellow polo, just an open mouth of a ramp. And we slipped down the pedestrian walkway into the north lot. The afternoon light hit us as we came out of the concrete shade. It was maybe 6:30, a bright, cool June evening. The sun still well up in gold, the kind of clean northwest evening Seattle apologizes for the 9 gray months with, the kind of light that makes you forgive the whole city. And for one full second, the parking lot looked completely, insultingly normal. Rows and rows of cars baking gently in the sun. A couple of tailgate stragglers down at the end of a row, folding chairs and a portable grill, a cooler, one of them laughing at something. The distant, muffled roar of the crowd behind and above us, that great warm animal sound coming through the concrete, rising and falling with the run of play. Somebody's radio playing classic rock 2 rows over. It was the most ordinary parking lot in the world. And then I heard the sirens, not 1 or 2, a wall of them, layered, overlapping, coming from the north and the east, all at once more sirens than I had ever heard at one time in my entire life. The sound of what had to be every emergency vehicle in a whole city screaming at the same moment. And screaming not toward one place, but everywhere, in all directions. That terrible spread-out sound of a system that has too many emergencies and not enough trucks. Desh stopped walking dead in his tracks, his beer forgotten in his hand. Teo's hand found the back of my jacket and gripped it, a thing he hadn't done since he was small. And above the sirens, and under them, thin and far away across the flat gray water of the bay, I heard something I couldn't place at first. A sound the human brain doesn't have a good file for. A sound that made the hair stand up on my arms before I could name it, and then I understood it was people. A lot of people. Screaming, a mass of screaming, carried clean across the water from the direction of downtown, that flat bay water carrying it the way water carries sound at night on a lake. "Truck," I said. "Fast now. Don't run. Walk fast." Because I already knew, standing there in that gold light, that behind us in the great bowl of the stadium the match was still going, that the crowd was still up and roaring, that someone was about to strike a ball that mattered, and that the whole 80,000 were going to roar one last time before the announcement came over the PA, before the decision about the gates got made, before they spilled out into the parking lots and the streets and the freeways, in a flood of confusion, straight into what we were only just beginning to see. We got to my truck, a 15-year-old Ford F250 I keep for hauling gear and pipe, parked way out at the raw edge of the lot against the chain link because I've always been too cheap to pay for the closer spots or the garage. I have never in my life been so grateful to be cheap. A parking garage that day would have been a concrete tomb. One narrow spiral ramp, jammed solid with panicking cars and the things coming up and through it in the dark. Out here on the open asphalt at the edge, we had a clear line to the surface streets, no cars boxing us in. And more than that, we had my work truck. And I want you to understand what that meant. A work truck isn't a car, it's a rolling toolbox. In the bed and the boxes, I had a full set of tools, 30 feet of good chain, a come-along, a 5-gallon jerry can of diesel I keep topped off out of an old job site habit from the days I'd get stranded out past nowhere. 2 cases of bottled water left over from a summer job that never got unloaded. A real first aid kit, not the useless plastic thing from the drugstore, but the kind with trauma dressings and a tourniquet because OSHA and common sense both demanded on a gas job. Work gloves, a flashlight, a headlamp, box cutters, a pry bar, a tire iron. I didn't think of any of that as survival gear. I never had. It was just the junk that lived in my truck, the accumulated silt of a working life. But a life is made of habits, the boring, invisible ones. And that day my cheap, cluttered, over-prepared habits were the whole difference between us and the people who'd parked close and paid for the garage. I got Teo into the back seat, told him to buckle up out of pure reflex, and Desh climbed up front. And I got in behind the wheel and sat for one single second with both hands on it, and my heart slamming against my ribs. And I made myself stop. Made myself breathe once, all the way down. Made myself think instead of react. That's the discipline the trade beats into you over 20 years. When the pressure spikes and the gauge redlines, the amateur lunges for the nearest valve because he has to do something. And the wrong valve turned in a panic makes everything worse. It can kill you and everyone in the building. The professional reads the whole system first. Cold, the full picture before his hand touches anything. 10 seconds of reading saves 1,000 seconds of dying. So I read it. Home was the instinct. Everything in me screamed it. West Seattle, 20 minutes on a good day, where Carys was lying in a dark room with an ice pack over her eyes and no idea any of this was happening, because her phone was face down and silenced against the migraine, because she'd waved us off and gone back to bed in the dark. Every cell in my body wanted to point the truck at her and floor it. But I made myself sit there one more second and look at the roads instead, the way I'd look at a schematic. To get to West Seattle from the stadium, you go south and then west. And the fastest way is over the West Seattle Bridge. And to reach the bridge, you have to thread through the industrial district and under a tangle of freeway overpasses where everything funnels down to a few lanes. I pictured it, drew the map in my head. And then I laid over that map the thing I knew was coming. 80,000 people about to be released all at once into those exact streets, plus whatever was already flooding out of downtown, plus every commuter and resident in the region now trying to flee at the same instant in the same direction. The whole road network around the stadium was about to seize like an engine run dry of oil, metal on metal, everything grinding to a stop and then welding solid. I've watched Desh's port do it in miniature. One bad hour, one closed gate, one broken crane, and the trucks back up for miles in an hour. And it takes a day to clear. This was going to be that. Times 100, across a whole city in the next 20 minutes. And a jammed road, I understood right then, wasn't just slow. A jammed road was a killing floor. Cars nose to tail, people trapped in them. And the things moving between the cars faster than a trapped man can get his seatbelt off. Call Carys, I told Desh. Keep trying, don't stop it, I'm driving. He nodded and started hammering redial, phone to his ear. I pulled out of the lot before the flood came. One of maybe a dozen cars leaving in that whole vast lot, everyone else still inside worshiping the scoreless game. And I turned us, and I felt Desh's head snap around, not south toward the bridge and home, but north and inland, the wrong direction, away from Carys. And Desh looked at me like I'd finally lost it. Wrong way, he said. Owen, wrong way. She's south. The bridge is a funnel, I said, keeping my voice flat and level. Threading between two abandoned cars somebody had just left in the lane with the doors open. In 10 minutes, it's a parking lot with people getting out of their cars on foot. I am not driving my son into that. We go north, up over the top, around the jam, then drop down through the neighborhoods, and come at West Seattle from the south end, the industrial way, where nobody in a panic thinks to go because it looks like the wrong direction. I don't know to this day if it was the right call. I've had 2 years to lie awake second-guessing every turn. But it was a system decision, made cold, not a fear decision made hot. And I've learned the hard way to trust the cold ones more, even when they point the wrong way. We got maybe 6 blocks before we saw our first one. And this is the part where I have to be careful with how I tell it, because I know exactly how it sounds. And I promised myself when I started telling these stories that I'd tell it straight, no embroidery, no movie nonsense. A man was standing in the middle of Occidental, in the road, facing us, not moving. Business casual slacks, a button down, the kind of guy who'd been at a desk an hour ago, and he had one shoe on and one shoe gone, just a sock foot on the asphalt. And he was swaying slightly, side to side, like a drunk. But it was 6:30 on a bright Saturday evening, and something about the swaying was wrong, mechanical, too regular, like a metronome ticking, no human looseness in it. As we rolled closer, slowing, I could see his face. And his face was the face from the news reporter, that stripped-down animal thing where the person is left, except worse, because there was nothing behind it at all. Nobody home. His jaw was working, his mouth opening and closing on nothing. And there was dark blood down the whole front of his shirt, too much of it, soaked in. And I understood in one instant that it wasn't his. I don't know how I knew, but I knew. Cold and total because he wasn't hurt, wasn't holding anything, wasn't favoring anything. He wasn't injured at all. He was just covered in someone else's blood. "Owen?" Desh said, very quiet, the phone dropping from his ear. "Owen." "I see him." I slowed the truck almost to a crawl. And here's the thing that shames me and saved us both. Every instinct in me still said to help. He was a man alone in the road, clearly in some kind of distress, hurt or in shock or in danger. And 43 years of being a decent person said, stop, roll down the window, ask if he's okay, call somebody, do not render aid to injured persons. The alert was in my head, in government capitals, and it was the only thing standing between me and rolling that window down. I kept my foot off the gas and let the truck creep forward, watching him. He turned toward the sound of the engine, that low idle. And when he oriented on us, when he locked on, something switched on in him, some circuit closing, and he came. And he didn't shamble. That's the movie version, and it's a lie. And I need you to hear me on this, because it's the thing that gets people killed. He came at us fast, a full flat-out sprint, arms not even reaching, just pumping, running at a 2-ton truck like it was prey, like a dog after a car, except a dog wants to chase, and this wanted to reach. And Teo made a sound in the back seat I had never heard him make and never want to hear again. And I put my foot down and swerved hard right, and we missed him by a foot, maybe less, close enough that I saw his ruined eyes go past the window. And in the mirror, I watched him stumble from the miss, catch himself with that horrible, boneless quickness, and immediately orient on something else, a woman half a block down, running along the sidewalk with 2 grocery bags clutched to her chest, and he went after her instead, without a half-second's hesitation. And I looked away, deliberately, made myself put my eyes back on the road before I could see it happen. And I have spent 2 years grateful that I had the presence of mind to look away. Nobody said anything for a full block. The only sound was the engine and Teo's breathing in the back. Then Teo, small and flat. That wasn't a person anymore. Not a question. And I didn't correct him, didn't soften it, didn't tell him some comforting adult lie, because he was right. And because I've learned that when a kid names the true shape of a terrible thing out loud, the worst thing you can do, the thing that actually breaks them, is tell them it's a different shape than the one they can plainly see. It teaches them not to trust their own eyes, and their own eyes might be the thing that keeps them alive. No, I said. It wasn't. And here's the rule now, Teo, and I need you to hear it and keep it. We do not help the ones like that, not ever, no matter what they look like, no matter who they look like. We help each other, the 4 of us, and anybody living. We do not touch anyone who's like that man. You understand me? There was a silence, and then he said he understood. Quiet but solid. Desh had gone gray in the face, staring out the windshield, and he crossed himself, which I hadn't seen him do since our mother's funeral. The reason it spread the way it did, and I've had 2 years to piece this together from the alerts, from what we saw with our own eyes, from the fragmentary numbers that came out later in the places where people trade what's left of the news, is that it moved through exactly the thing the alerts kept desperately warning us about. Injured persons. Here's the mechanism, and it's the cruelest thing I know. Somebody would get bitten or scratched, and they wouldn't drop. They'd stay up, lucid, talking, human, scared, for anywhere from 10 minutes to an hour, long enough to walk into a hospital under their own power, long enough for a good Samaritan to sprint across a parking lot to help them, long enough to be loaded into the back of an ambulance with 2 paramedics in a sealed metal box going 60 down the freeway. And then they'd turn, in the waiting room, in the ambulance, in the arms of the person helping them. The kindest instinct we have as a species, the run toward the crash instinct, the reach for the hurt stranger instinct, the thing that makes us human and has kept us alive as a species for longer than there have been cities, that was the vector. It didn't spread despite people helping each other. It spread because people helped each other. Read that again and sit with it, because I have to live in it. Every decent reflex we have was turned into a weapon and aimed back at us. And the only defense the government could think of in time was to blast out a message begging 80,000 kind people to stop, for God's sake, being kind. And 80,000 kind people, sitting in a stadium in face paint, cheering a scoreless game, took that message and filed it under technical problems. If you'd been in that stadium, phone buzzing garbled in your pocket, the game on a knife's edge, would you have stood up and walked out on nothing but a bad feeling and a soccer ball guy grinning at you, and a whole crowd calm as a Sunday? Or would you have stayed for the winner? Sit with it a second before you answer. I genuinely want to know, and I ask because I still don't know myself whether I was smart that day or just lucky. And I've come to believe there's a real difference between those two things, and it matters which one you are. We threaded north and then west along the top of the ridge, climbing, and from up there through gaps in the houses, we could see the city laid out below us, and we could see it starting to go. Columns of smoke, 3 of them that I counted standing straight up out of downtown in the still evening air before they smeared sideways at the top. Traffic on I-5 below us frozen absolutely solid in both directions. A river of metal gone still. And this is the image I will carry to my own grave. People getting out of the frozen cars, opening the doors and climbing out and running. Along the shoulder, up the on-ramps, between the stopped lanes, and behind them, moving through the stalled traffic faster than any of the running people could go, weaving between the cars, the shapes. The freeway had become the single worst place in the entire city to be. All those people who'd understood early, who'd been smart enough to try to drive out the moment they got it. All of them funneled onto the same few ribbons of concrete with no exit, boxed into their cars. And now the cars weren't escape pods. They were cages, steel boxes you couldn't get out of fast enough. I'd made the right call not taking the bridge. I knew it looking down at that. It gave me exactly no comfort at all, watching it, because being right about the way people die is not the same as saving them. Desh finally got Carys. I heard the call actually connect, the ringing stop, and I nearly drove the truck off the ridge road with the pure force of the relief that went through me. He put it on speaker and held the phone up between us. Her voice came through thick and slow and confused, still half buried in the migraine dark. Dash? Where's Owen? Is the game over? Why are there so many? And then a pause, and her voice changed, sharpened, snapped all the way awake, the drugged slowness gone out of it in an instant. Owen, There's something happening outside. There are people in the street. Something's wrong with them. Owen! I'm here, baby. I'm driving. We're coming to you right now. I kept my voice completely flat and level, the exact voice I use when a client's boiler is about to fail. And I don't want them running out of the building in a panic before I've fixed it. The voice that says everything is under control, even when nothing is. Carys, listen to me. Listen. Do not go outside. Do not open the door for anyone. Do you hear me? Not for anyone. Not for somebody who's hurt. Not for somebody you know. Not for a neighbor, if they're acting wrong at all. Lock the front door and the back. Go upstairs. Take your phone. Take the charger. Take a knife from the kitchen block on the way up. And get into Teo's room. And lock that door too. We're maybe 15 minutes out. Can you do that for me? Say it back. There was a silence. A bad one. And in the silence I heard, through her phone, coming from her end of the line, a sound. A heavy, wet impact against wood. A thud that had weight behind it. Then again, the same, patient, blind. Someone, or something, was hitting the front door of my house. Carys. My voice cracked clean down the middle on her name, the professional flatness gone. Go up now. Right now. Do not answer it. Go, baby, go. Owen, it's Mrs. Aldous from next door. She's out there, And I heard my wife start to say something about the door being unlocked, or going down to check. Some fragment of the reflex that had kept her a good neighbor for 11 years. And I understood in one long plunging drop through the bottom of my stomach that the neighbor was already inside, or coming inside, that the wet impacts I'd heard weren't knocking. They were Carys, pushing the door shut with her whole body against someone she'd known and loved for 11 years. A woman who'd fed our cat when we traveled and left tomatoes from her garden on our porch in August. And that every kind instinct my wife had in her was about to be turned into a knife and used against her exactly the way it had been used against the man on Occidental and the woman with the groceries. It's not her anymore, I shouted into the phone, and I heard my own voice break the calm, and I didn't care. Carys, that's not Mrs. Aldous anymore. Go up the stairs, lock the door, don't look at her, don't talk to her, go now. And I put my foot flat to the floor and took the truck down off the ridge toward home. Faster than that old Ford had any right to move. Tires howling on the curves, Desh braced with one hand on the dash and one on the door. Teo dead silent in the back with his hands over his mouth. And Carys's phone still open on the seat between us, and through it, distant and small and awful, the sound of my wife's feet running up our own stairs. The line stayed open the whole way down. That's the thing that saved a piece of my sanity and destroyed another piece of it. In the same stroke, we could hear her the entire time. So we knew she was alive, and so we heard everything. We heard her feet pounding on the stairs. We heard the slam of Teo's bedroom door, and then the heavy scrape of his desk being dragged across the floor and shoved against it. We heard her breathing, ragged and fast and too high in her chest. And under all of it, downstairs in my house, we heard the sounds of something moving through the rooms, knocking into the furniture we'd argued for a week about buying, the crash of the lamp her mother gave us going over. A slow, blind wrongness moving room to room. No purpose to it. No calling of her name. Just a thing looking for the warm, loud, living thing it had heard. Talk to me, Carys, I said, forcing the calm back into my voice by main strength. Keep talking to me. We're coming down Delridge now, you hear me? We're close. We're minutes out. Just keep talking. And she talked. God, she talked. She told me the thing downstairs wasn't saying anything, wasn't calling for her, just moving and bumping and moving. She told me she'd wedged Teo's desk chair up under the doorknob, the way she'd seen somebody do in a movie once, and she didn't know if it would hold anything. She told me, and this is my wife, migraine and terror and a monster on the stairs, and all she told me Teo's window looked out over the back porch, and she thought she could get out onto the porch roof from it and drop to the yard if she had to, already scouting the exit. I fell in love with Carys at a community college in 1999 because she was the only person in a crowded orientation room who actually turned around and read the fire evacuation map on the wall while everyone else looked at their shoes. And here she was 25 years later, reading the map again, in the dark, in the worst hour of both our lives. Delridge was chaos, but it was moving chaos, not the frozen death of the freeway. And that difference was everything. People were driving fast and badly, blowing through red lights, cutting across lanes, one car up on the median. But at least the cars were moving. There was flow. And where there's flow, there's a way through. I ran every light with them, one hand on the horn, weaving. And twice I had to swerve wide around figures standing in the road. And I did not slow down to identify them, did not look at their faces to check whether they were living or turned. I want to be able to tell you that I checked, that I made sure. I didn't check. I'd made the rule, and I was keeping it, because you don't get to make a rule to protect your family, and then break it every single time your conscience gives a twinge. Or it isn't a rule. It's just a suggestion you follow when it's easy. And a suggestion won't save anybody. That's a cold, hard thing to learn about yourself in the space of an evening. I know it about myself now. And I can't unknow it. We came up our own street, and I want to tell you exactly what I saw, so you understand the choice that was already loading up in front of me. Our house is a little blue two-story with white trim and a Japanese maple in the front yard that Carys planted the year Teo was born. The front door was standing wide open, a black rectangle. And on the front lawn, moving in that awful swaying then sprinting way, were three of them, all oriented on the house, on the upstairs window, heads tilted up toward it because they could hear Carys up there, because she was the only warm, loud, living, breathing thing on the whole dark street. And they were drawn to it the way the man on Occidental had been drawn to my engine. The way they were all drawn to life and noise and heat. And one of the three was Mrs. Aldous. I knew her instantly, even from behind, even in the failing light. I knew the cardigan, the pale green cardigan she wore in every season. "Teo, stay in the truck," I said, twisting around to him, gripping his knee hard enough to make him look at me. "Door's locked, you hear me? And if anything comes at this truck, anything, you climb over into the driver's seat. You know how. We've practiced in the lot, and you drive. You drive to your uncle's port at the south end, and you honk at the gate until somebody opens it. Do not get out of this truck for me or for your uncle. Promise me right now." He didn't promise, he said. "Dad." Just that one word, and I heard everything in it. "Teo, promise me." "I promise." And he was crying, quiet, the tears just running, 16 years old and promising to leave his father and his uncle behind on a lawn if it came to that. And I made him say it out loud anyway, made him promise. Because one of us had to be the one who lived to remember all of this, and it was never going to be me if it came down to a choice between us. Here's the decision, laid out flat the way it was laid out in front of me in about 4 seconds. And I've turned it over 1,000 times since. 3 of them on the lawn. 1 of me, 1 of Desh. No weapons worth the name a truck, a tire iron, and 30 feet of chain. My wife upstairs behind a bedroom door held shut with a desk chair that might or might not hold. The smart survival move, the cold one, the one a stranger reading about it later would tell you was correct, is that 2 unarmed middle-aged men Do not charge 3 of those things to reach a person who is, for the moment, at this exact second, still safe behind a locked door. You wait. You think. You draw them off. You find the smart angle. You don't throw both your remaining fighters into a bad fight for a person who isn't in immediate danger. Everything I know about not getting your hands caught in the moving parts of a system said, don't charge the machine. And I want you to tell me honestly, down in the comments where I read everyone, if it were your family behind that door, would you have waited for the smart move? Would you have sat in the truck and worked the angles while you heard the desk chair start to give? Because I already knew, sitting there, that I wasn't going to wait. I knew it the second I saw that pale green cardigan on my front lawn. Some decisions your body makes before your mind is done arguing. But I didn't charge. That's the thing. I didn't do the stupid thing. I did the thing the trade taught me, which is that when you can't overpower a system, you redirect it. Chain stays, I said fast. You drive. I'm going to draw all 3 of them to the truck, make myself the loudest thing on the street. You swing wide and slow so I can get in the bed, and the second they're chasing us, you gun it up the block and lose them. Then we double back with the lights off. We peel them off the house, and then we go in the back. Dash, God bless him to the end of my days, didn't argue, didn't tell me it was insane. Though it was, he just slid across into the driver's seat and gripped the wheel and said, "Don't you dare die on that lawn where your kid can watch it happen." Which was exactly, precisely the right thing to say, the only right thing, because it put Teo back at the center of it, and it made me careful. It turned me from a man who wanted to die reaching his wife into a man who had to live to get all of them out. I got out of the truck, and I banged the tire iron flat against the steel tailgate hard 3 times, the clang ringing down the quiet street, and I yelled the first time in my whole adult life I have ever made a sound for the pure purpose of being prey, of drawing a predator. And something in my animal brain recoiled from it even as I did it. All 3 heads on the lawn snapped toward me at once, in that horrible, synchronized unison, like puppets on one string. And they came. Fast. And I went up and over the tailgate into the bed of the truck as Desh rolled it forward. And 2 of them slammed into the side of the moving truck and clawed at the painted steel with their hands. And Mrs. Aldous, the fastest of the 3. Somehow, a 70-year-old woman, moving like something else entirely, got a hand on the tailgate and hauled herself half up into the bed with me. And I found myself looking straight down into the face of a woman who had babysat my son when he was 4 years old, who had cried at his middle school graduation. And there was nothing in that face. Nothing. Not a flicker. And I put the flat of my work boot against her chest and shoved her off the tailgate into the street. She hit the asphalt and rolled and was up again in a half second, and chasing, all 3 of them chasing now, strung out behind the truck up the block, away from my house. And it worked. It actually worked. We peeled them off my home like tape off a wall, and my hands were shaking so hard on the side rail I could barely hold on. Desh took them 2 blocks up the street, then cut a hard left, then eased off the gas just enough to keep them following without quite catching us, dangling us like bait. The loudest, warmest thing they'd found, then took a right, then floored it down a straight stretch and lost all 3 of them behind a long row of parked cars. And we doubled back on a parallel street with the headlights off, and the engine dropped low. And by the time we killed it a house down from ours, I still couldn't hold the tire iron steady. And Teo in the back seat had both hands pressed over his mouth and his eyes huge, and we coasted the last of the way and came up the alley behind our own house, dead quiet. The back door was locked, and I still had my keys. And I have never in my life been so grateful for the boring, familiar weight of a key ring in my pocket. The little jingle of it. We went in through the kitchen. The house was wrecked. Chairs over, the lamp in pieces, but empty of the moving things for the moment. And I took the stairs 3 at a time, calling Carys's name the whole way up, loud and clear, so she'd know it was me and not one of them coming. Carys, it's me. It's Owen. It's me. And I heard the desk chair scrape and the bedroom door yanked open, and she was there, alive, on her feet, still, absurdly, clutching the melted ice pack in one hand from where she'd grabbed it off her eyes on the way up 2 flights of stairs into hell. And I had her. And Teo came pounding up behind me and had her. And the 3 of us stood locked together in the doorway of my son's room. And Desh stood at the top of the stairs with the tire iron up, watching the front door down below, guarding us. And for about 90 seconds, I've counted it out since. It was about 90 seconds the 4 of us were together and alive and breathing in one room. And I let myself believe, just for those 90 seconds, that the worst was behind us. That we'd done it. It was not behind us. It was barely the beginning of it. But I'm going to keep those 90 seconds. And I've decided you deserve to have them too before I tell you the rest. Because they cost so much to buy. And because I didn't yet know what the rest of that night was going to ask of me. Or take from me. And there's a mercy in a moment you don't yet know is the last easy one. We couldn't stay in the house. That was clear within minutes, and it was Desh at the window who said it first. The 3 we'd drawn off would circle back. They always came back toward sound, toward warmth. And a house with 4 living people breathing and moving inside it was a beacon on a dark street, a lit match in a field. And more were coming. I stood at Teo's window and looked out, and I could see them. Singles and pairs, drifting down our street from the direction of the arterial where the traffic had jammed solid, and the cars had become cages, and the cages, one by one, had opened and let out what was inside. West Seattle is a peninsula. That's the geography that was about to kill us or save us. One bridge on and off, and that bridge was surely gone or jammed or held, and a couple of low roads at the south end that run through the industrial flats and a marshy wildlife area. We were on high ground, which felt safe and was a trap, because high ground on a peninsula is just a corner you back yourself into. We were in a bottle, and the bottle was filling up from the bottom. I laid it out fast at the top of the stairs, while Carys got real shoes on with hands that were finely steady, and Teo filled a backpack with the wrong things, I noticed, his phone charger and a water bottle. And I found later at the bottom the framed photo from his nightstand of the 3 of us grinning at a Mariners game 2 summers back. And I let him take the wrong things, all of them, because a person needs one unreasonable thing to carry out of their old life, one object with no survival value at all, or they leave a piece of themselves behind in the ruin and never get it back. Desh wanted to run for his port, the container terminal at the south end of the flats where he worked. And I understood why. I want to be fair to him. He knew it cold, every foot of it. It had fences and gates, high ground of a kind, up on the container stacks. Water on one side, one road in, which meant it was defensible. And this was his real argument, the one he leaned into his crew. "There's guys down there right now," he said, gripping my arm. "Night shift, guys who slept through the whole game. They'll have heard. They'll have locked the gates down tight by now. Piers are defensible, Owen. One road in, and you can hold one road. We hole up, we wait for the guard, and listen. There are containers sitting on that dock right now, full of everything from generators to bottled water to canned food. Whole shipments. I know exactly what's in them. I logged half of them in myself." He'd spent his entire working life knowing to the palate what was inside those steel boxes, and it was, I have to admit it, a genuinely good plan built on real, hard-won knowledge, the same kind of knowledge that had kept the three of us alive so far. But I was thinking about the roads again. Always the roads. To reach the terminal from the house, we'd have to come down off the peninsula and cross the industrial flats. And those flats sat right at the base of the big freeway interchange, the exact place I'd watched from the ridge where the cars had jammed and disgorged all their people onto the concrete. Desh's good plan ran straight through the single worst piece of ground in the entire city. I told him so, flat. He pushed back hard, harder than he'd pushed all night, because it was his turf, his crew, his knowledge. And every instinct he had was screaming at him to run toward the thing he understood. And I get that. I feel that same pull toward the systems I know. And here's the thing about my brother and me. The thing that's been true our whole lives. We love each other more than either of us can say out loud. And we have never once, not one single time, agreed on which way to go. Not on a road trip, not on a business, not on how to bury our mother. Usually it doesn't matter which of us is right. We argue, and one of us gives and life goes on. That night, it was going to matter more than anything ever had. And I could feel the two of us splitting apart, right there at the top of the stairs, the old fault line opening. While outside the window, the light went dirty orange with smoke, and the long June evening finally started to die. I made a call I'm still not sure about. I said we'd try for the port, his way, because he knew it, and because a defensible position genuinely does beat driving around forever burning fuel, but that we would not, under any circumstances, cross the flats at the interchange. We'd go the long way, south along the very edge of the water on the small industrial service roads, the ones the trucks use at 3 a.m. to avoid the interchange, the ones Desh actually knew better than the freeway because he'd driven them 10,000 times, hauling loads in the dead hours. He agreed to that. It was a compromise, and I'll tell you what I know about compromises made in a crisis. They're usually just the way everybody gets killed a little more slowly instead of anybody getting saved. But it was the best I had in the moment. And when I looked at Carys, she gave me one short nod. And that nod carried more weight than any argument my brother could make. Because she's the one who reads the exit maps, and if she'd looked at the plan and judged the exit viable, then I'd trust the exit. We went out through the garage, all 4 of us in the truck, Carys and Teo in the back seat, Desh riding shotgun with the tire iron laid across his knees, me driving. I backed out of the garage slow, lights off, windows up and locked. And the first thing I learned about driving at dusk through a city that's coming apart is that sound is the thing that draws them. So you go slow and you go quiet. And you fight down every single urge to gun the engine and run. It is the exact opposite of every car chase you've ever watched. Survival that night wasn't speed. Survival was creeping through my own familiar neighborhood at 15 miles an hour with the engine barely above idle, weaving the truck around abandoned cars and around the shapes standing in the road, easing past them slow and steady, close enough to touch, close enough that one of them turned its ruined gray face to Teo's window as we passed, and looked right at him through the glass from a foot away. And my son did not make a single sound. My brave, silent, watching kid did not make one sound, as the thing pawed once at the door handle with a hand that didn't work right, and then lost interest. Because the truck was quiet, and the truck was cold metal, and the truck just kept moving. No fear smell, no noise, nothing to lock onto. And we slid past it, into the dark. We came down off the peninsula, on Highland Park Way, a long curving descent I'd driven 1,000 times in daylight without a thought. And at the bottom of it, the world opened out into the industrial flats. And I stopped the truck behind a stalled semi to look before committing, because you always look before you commit. That's rule one in the trade. You never open a valve you haven't traced. And what I saw from behind that semi made me understand that Desh's whole plan, and all the good hard-won knowledge it was built on, was already obsolete, overtaken, dead. The container terminal was on fire, not the whole thing. But a section of the yard off to the south was burning hard. Well, in a fuel fire, I could tell by the deep orange of it and the greasy black of the smoke boiling up off it. Maybe a fuel truck, maybe a big generator set, something with tanks, and around that fire, drawn to the light and the roar and crackle of the flames, the way they were drawn to everything living and loud, were figures, dozens of them, maybe far more, back in the dark past the firelight. And the one road into the terminal, the single road in that Desh had called defensible precisely because there was only one way in, was choked solid with them, and with the wreckage of vehicles that had tried to force their way in or out and failed. His crew, if any of them were still alive behind those gates, were sealed in with the fire and the crowd. And there was no version of the next 5 minutes where I drove 4 people I loved through that road and came out the other side with 4 people. Maybe not with any. Desh saw it too. I watched my brother's face in the orange light as the plan he'd hung all his hope on, the one built on 20 years of knowing that yard better than his own home, burned in front of him. And I did not say I told you so, because there is no lower thing one brother can do to another. And because I hadn't really been right, my plan had just been less specifically, less immediately wrong. His voice, when it came, had something broken all the way through it, because some of those figures at the gate were people he knew, guys he'd worked beside for years, the way Mrs. Aldous had been someone we knew. "Okay," he said, very quietly, staring at the fire. "Okay, not the port." He turned to me and his eyes were wet and lost. "Where then? Where the hell do we go, Owen? Where's left?" And that was the exact moment the whole night stopped being a story about escaping to a place and became a story about the fact that there might not be a place. Every safe harbor any of the 3 men in that truck could name was gone on fire, or on the far side of a jammed and impassable freeway, or a peninsula with the only bridge down. The instinct we'd all been running on. The deep human instinct that says, get to a known strong point, hole up, wait for rescue, hold on until help comes. That instinct assumed 2 things. It assumed there was a strong point, and it assumed rescue was coming. And sitting there behind that stalled semi in the reek of burning diesel, watching the port die, I felt both of those assumptions go out from under me at the same instant, like 2 floorboards giving way together. Nobody was coming to the terminal. Nobody was holding the freeway. And those gray helicopters I'd watched cut across the stadium hours ago, fast and low and unmarked, heading dead straight for the open water, they hadn't been coming in to help anybody. They'd been leaving, getting the important people, whoever gets decided to be important, out over the water, while the rest of us were still on our feet in the stands, cheering a scoreless game. Help wasn't late. Help wasn't stuck in traffic. Help had already been dispatched, and it had already decided who it was for. And it was not for the 80,000 of us in the stands, or the 4 of us in this truck. "Water," Carys said from the back seat. And all 3 men turned around to look at her. She had Teo's phone out, screen glowing on her face, the migraine burned clean out of her by pure adrenaline. Terror being the only cure that had ever actually worked on it. And she'd been doing the thing she does. The thing none of the rest of us had thought to do, reading the map while 3 grown men panicked at a wall of fire. Not the port, the marina. Owen, the little public marina south of the terminal, past the flats, on that small road along the water. Boats. Think about it. If half the city is trying to drive out and dying on the freeway to do it, nobody is thinking about boats. We don't need rescue to come to us. We need to just not be in the city anymore. We need to be on the water. She looked up from the phone and straight at me. You fix boiler systems on half the buildings on the waterfront. You've told me 100 times over dinner that you could hotwire a bilge pump in your sleep. Can you start a boat? And I looked at my wife, who reads exit maps, who had just in about 30 seconds cut clean through every single failed assumption the 3 men in that truck were running on, who had found the one door none of us had thought to check, and I understood, fully for the first time, that the strong point we'd been driving all over a dying city trying to reach wasn't a place at all. It never had been. It was her. It had been her the whole time, in the dark bedroom with the ice pack, scouting the porch roof, reading the map. I can start a boat, I said. And it was true. Marine diesels aren't so different in their bones from the systems I put my hands on every working day of my life. Fuel, air, compression, a battery, a solenoid, a starter, a fuel shutoff. It's all one family. And if the battery's dead, there are ways around a dead battery with a screwdriver and a length of wire and enough nerve to bridge a solenoid by hand. I'd been on enough waterfront jobs and drunk enough end-of-shift beers on enough docks with enough marine mechanics to know my way around an engine bay in a boat. It had never once been a survival skill I'd cultivated on purpose, never something I'd trained for. It was just, one more time, the accidental competence of an ordinary working life. The same accidental competence as the jerry can and the chain and the cases of water in the bed. A man's boring ordinary habits are his real emergency kit. And nobody ever plans to survive a thing like this. You just find out, in the worst hour of your whole life, which of your dull, unglamorous skills turn out to be the exact ones that matter. Getting to the Marina meant crossing one corner of the flats, and there was no clever way around it this time. No service road, no long way. So we did the thing that had worked all night, and we did it slow. I backed the truck out from behind the semi and picked a line along the very edge of the water. The frontage road that runs right along the black flat surface, keeping the burning terminal to our left where the crowd was clustered and the dark open water to our right. We went at a walking pace, lights off, in the last of the failing light. And there I learned the second rule of that night, the one that saved us. The more of them there are gathered in one place, the safer the edges of that place become because they cluster tight around the single, loudest, brightest thing. And the fuel fire at the terminal was holding a whole crowd of them fixed on it like a magnet holds iron filings. We slipped along the dark, cold edge of that magnet, right past the outer ring of them, and most of them never even turned their heads. The few that did, we eased past. No change in speed, no change in engine note. Once, one of them got a hand on the side of the truck bed and dragged its fingers along the metal with a long screech, and Carys pulled Teo down flat against the seat. And I kept my foot dead steady on the gas. No acceleration, no lurch, no sound change at all. And the hand dragged and then fell away behind us into the dark. The Marina was a small public one, the kind every waterfront town has, and nobody thinks about it on a couple of wooden docks, 30 or 40 slips, mostly modest boats, day cruisers, a few small sailboats with their sails bagged, a couple of aging cabin cruisers owned, I'd have bet, by men who loved them a great deal more than the boats deserved to be loved. And it was, exactly as Carys had bet, nearly deserted, dark and quiet, the water slapping the pilings. But not empty. There was one other family down there when we rolled up, a man and a woman and 2 small kids standing frozen on the main dock next to a locked security gangway. And I understood the whole shape of their situation at a single glance. because it was the shape ours would have been without me. They'd had the exact same smart idea, driven to the water, and hit the exact same wall. The security gate to the docks was locked, a keypad lock, and they didn't have the code. And there was a beautiful safe boat sitting 50 feet away on the other side of it, and no way on earth to reach it. And the man was throwing his shoulder against the steel gate over and over, uselessly. And the two little kids were crying, loud, in the dark. And the crying carried. Here's where the whole night came down to a single point, and I want to tell it to you exactly, because it's the part I most need to get right. Because right behind us, drawn by the man's shouting and the children's crying, the two loudest things on that whole stretch of dark water, 3 of them had peeled off the terminal crowd and were coming down the frontage road toward the Marina, toward all of us, moving in that swaying then sprinting way, closing. And I had a locked gate between my family and the boats, a stranger's family already trapped and panicking against that same gate, dead things closing in from behind, and about 90 seconds to decide who I was going to be for the rest of whatever life I had left. The cold survival math said drive past. Say it out loud with me, because I heard it clear as a voice in my own head. Drive past, don't stop. Find another marina down the coast, there are others. Don't stop for strangers you don't know when the things are already coming, and the gate is locked anyway, and you might not even get it open in time for your own. Do not render aid. I'd made that rule at the very start of the night, and I'd kept it brutally, all the way through the man on Occidental. The shapes in the road I hadn't slowed down to check. The boot against Mrs. Aldis's chest. I'd kept the rule, and the rule had kept us alive. But the rule had never been about the living. That's what I understood in that 90 seconds. The rule was about not touching the infected, not helping the ones who'd turned, not letting the kind instinct become the vector. It had never once been about driving past a living family with 2 crying children trapped against a gate, and somewhere in the last hour, watching the port burn, understanding down in my gut that help had already looked at the 80,000 of us and decided we weren't its problem somewhere in there. I'd started to feel hard. That if we survived this night by becoming the kind of people who drove past a family and 2 crying kids to save ourselves, then whatever climbed off the other side of this night wearing my face and my son's face wasn't going to be worth the diesel it took to keep alive. And Teo was watching me. That's the whole thing right there. Teo was always watching me. And every rule I made that night, every choice, he was going to carry inside him for the rest of his life as the working definition of what a father does, of what a man does when everything falls apart and the systems all fail at once and nobody's coming to help. I stopped the truck. The keypad, I called out to the man, sharp, and he spun around from the gate, wild-eyed, chest heaving. The keypad marina gates in this county, half of them still run the default maintenance code straight from the manufacturer. Nobody ever changes it. I've seen it 100 times. And I did know this. Cold, I'd programmed and cursed at 100 of these cheap panels on waterfront jobs. And the dirty, open secret of the entire built world is how much of it is held shut by codes and passwords that nobody ever once bothered to change from the factory setting. Move, let me at it. I was already out of the truck and moving. Dash out the other side and beside me, tire iron up. But facing outward, facing the road, facing the 3 shapes coming down it. Putting his body between the machine and my family and buying me the seconds I needed. I got to the keypad and I punched in the maintenance override sequence I could type in my sleep. And the little LED went red. Wrong code, and my stomach dropped straight through the dock into the black water. And behind me, I could hear the things coming. Close now. and I made my hands stop shaking, and I punched in the second most common one, the one the cheaper installers use because it's one digit shorter. And the LED went green, and the bolt thunked back hard, and the gate swung free. And I have never, in my whole life, loved a piece of lazy, negligent, factory default bad security so much or so completely. "Go, go all of you! First big boat with a real cabin!" I shouted, and I herded them through the open gate, my family and the strangers both, all of them at once. Carys, with her hand fisted white-knuckled in the back of Teo's jacket, the stranger woman somehow carrying both her kids at the same time, one on each hip, the stranger man beside me now where Desh had been. And Desh came backing through the gate last of all, tire iron up and ready. And the three shapes hit the closing gate a half-second after he was through. And I threw the bolt home, and they clawed at the chain link with hands that didn't work right, faces pressed against the wire. And it held. It held. And we were on the docks, out over the water on the wooden planking, with the black cold water on three sides of us, and the dead on the land side of a locked fence. And for the first time in the entire night, the geometry of the thing was finally wildly in our favor. A fence they couldn't open, and water they couldn't cross. The boat I picked was an old 32-foot cabin cruiser, diesel, and I picked it for exactly 2 reasons, and no others. Diesels don't need a spark to run, which meant no ignition system to defeat. And I could see through the salt-hazed windows, in the last of the light, that it had a real enclosed cabin below. A place the little kids could be shut into and hidden away from the water and thus a cold in the dark. It was locked, of course. Everything worth taking is locked. I broke the companionway hatch with the tire iron. 3 hard blows, the sound of it awful and loud, across the quiet marina. And it felt like a crime, breaking into a stranger's boat. And it was. And it was without any question the very smallest crime committed anywhere on that entire waterfront that whole day. I dropped down through the broken hatch into the engine bay, while up on deck Desh and the stranger Merrick, he finally told me his name was, in a rush, a warehouse foreman from Delridge, his wife Inez, their 2 girls 4 and 6 years old, while Merrick and Desh worked the dock lines free of the cleats. And Carys got everyone down below into the cabin. And I put my 2 hands on an engine I'd never seen before in my life, in near total dark. And I started reading it the only way I know how to read any machine. The way I've read 1,000 of them. By feel, by logic, by the bone-deep certainty that all of these machines are cousins to one another. And that if you truly understand one of them, you can understand its whole family in the dark by touch. The batteries were half dead. Of course they were, sitting in an unused boat. But there were 2 banks wired in, a house bank and a start bank, and a selector switch on the bulkhead. And I found it by feel and threw it to both and combined them, pulling every last amp out of both banks at once, and I got just barely enough juice to turn the engine over. It cranked slow, groaned, died, cranked again, groaned, caught for half a second, died. And I said out loud to a machine I'd never met, come on, you." And on the 3rd try, it caught and held and roared, a huge cloud of white startup smoke coughing out the stern. And the sound of it was the loudest thing in the entire world, the loudest sound I'd heard all night. And it drew every shape on the shore straight to the fence at once, like one long collective scream. And it did not matter, even a little, because we were already sliding backward out of the slip into the black water of the Duwamish, with the whole burning city sinking away behind us over the transom. I want so badly to be able to tell you it was a clean escape after that. It wasn't. As we backed out of the slip, another survivor came sprinting down the main dock out of the dark. A young guy, college age maybe, no shirt, blood on him, screaming for us to wait, to help him. Please, please wait. And he ran flat out to the end of the dock and leapt for the boat as we pulled away, and he caught the swim platform at the stern with both hands and hauled himself half up out of the water onto it, kicking. And in the light spilling from the cabin, I saw the bite on his shoulder, a deep, dark crescent. Torn, hours old maybe, already going wrong at the edges. And I knew exactly what he was going to become. And I knew roughly how long we had before he became it. And Merrick saw it too. At the same second, saw the bite. And the two of us looked at each other across the width of that one terrible moment, over the boy's straining shoulders, and neither of us said a word, because there was nothing to say. He was still a person right then. That's the whole cruelty of the thing, the part that has no clean answer and never will. He was talking, crying, begging, saying please, saying he was so scared, saying he didn't want to die. Human, completely human. As human and as scared and as worth saving as any single one of us on that boat. The transition wasn't instant. It never was. That was the trap the whole disease was built on. Helping him aboard meant every living soul on that boat, the 4-year-old and the 6-year-old, asleep on their feet. Teo, Carys, Inez, Marek, Desh, all of us dead within the hour when he turned in the sealed cabin below, in the dark, at close range, with nowhere to run. Not helping him meant putting my boot against another living human being, one who was still human, still begging, still looking me in the eye, and shoving him back off the platform into the cold black water to drown, or worse, with my son 20 feet away below decks, and my wife's eyes on me from the companionway, and this stranger Marek, standing beside me waiting to see exactly what kind of man had just risked his life to save his 2 little girls. I told you before that I looked away from the woman with the groceries on Occidental, that I had the mercy of looking away. I did not get to look away from this one. This one was mine to do, up close, at arm's length, looking a still human face directly in the eyes while I did it. I'm not going to describe it any further than to tell you that I did the thing that kept the living people on that boat alive, and that the young man's face is the one I see most nights when I close my eyes more than Mrs. Aldis's empty face, more than the swaying man in the road, more than any of them, because he was still a whole person when I made my choice. And I will never be certain, not for one single day left in my life, that I did the right thing instead of only doing the thing that worked. And I've come to believe those are 2 genuinely different things, the right thing and the thing that works. And that a good life is mostly spent never having to find out how far apart they can be. So tell me, if you've ever had to find out. Tell me down in the comments where the line is between those 2 things. Because 2 years on, I still cannot find it. And I've stopped believing anyone can. We got out onto the open water of Puget Sound as full dark finally came down. Real dark, no city glow reaching us, and I throttled back and then killed the engine altogether to save what was left of the dying batteries. And I let us drift on the current and the light evening wind, the boat rocking gentle. And the 7 of us sat in the dark on a stranger's boat and looked back at Seattle. The city was a low, sullen orange glow under a black lid of its own smoke. And the darker mass of downtown stood against the burning where the towers still rose, dark and dead now, their windows black, silhouetted against the fires behind them. And you could see, even from a mile out on the cold water, that it was gone. Not gone the way a building falls all at once in a cloud of dust, gone the way a body goes cold, from the outside in, section by section, the lights failing block by block by block, as the grid I'd spent my entire life. plugged into and pumping gas and heat and pressure through, finally lost its last operators and quietly went dark. I know exactly how a system dies, because I've watched 100 small ones flicker and gutter and die on my own workbench under my own hands. And I sat on the deck of that stranger's boat and watched the biggest system I had ever known, the whole living, breathing city, die in front of me across the black water, holding my son hard against my side, my wife's cold hand in mine, my brother staring down into the water with his jaws set, and two strangers' children finally asleep from pure, bottomless exhaustion in the cabin below our feet. Teo spoke once, quietly, watching the city burn. The game was still 0-0, he said, to no one, to the water. When we left, it was still 0-0. And it was such a strange, small thing to say, floating out there in the dark with a dead city on the horizon, that Desh let out a sound that was half a sob and half a laugh, a terrible broken sound. And I understood exactly what my son meant, because I'd been circling the same thought myself for hours without landing on it. Somewhere back in that great bowl of a stadium, at the exact moment the first person died in Bellevue and the first garbled alert buzzed unread and dismissed in 80,000 pockets, the score had been nothing to nothing. Everything still possible. The winner still unwritten, still out there to be decided. And we had all sat there in the noise and the sun and the face paint, believing with our whole hearts that the single most important thing in the entire world at that moment was whether a ball crossed a white line. The first alert had come at the 35th minute. We'd had, if you counted honestly from that very first buzz against my leg, close to 2 hours of warning. 2 hours. A whole city handed 2 full hours to understand what was coming for it. And the understanding had been drowned out, every minute of it, by the sound of our own cheering. I never did find out if the match finished. I've looked, in the 2 years since, in all the ragged places where people trade what's left of the news and the world. And I have never once found a single soul who knows how USA versus Belgium ended, or whether it ended at all, or whether the gates opened in time to let those people out, or whether they turned that beautiful loud stadium into the worst of all the tombs. 80,000 locked inside with the ones who turned. I think about the father 2 seats down, bouncing the toddler in the tiny USA jersey on his knee. I think about the guy who painted his whole bald head like a soccer ball, turning around, grinning, so strangers could take his picture on the last good afternoon of his life. I think about the 2 cops at the top of the exit ramp saying, "Don't open the gates." And I don't know if they were saving those people or dooming them, and neither did they. I hope with everything in me that I'm wrong about how it went in there. I'll never know. And the not knowing is its own particular weight I carry, because 80,000 people is not a number. It never was a number. It's 80,000 fathers and sons and daughters, 80,000 people who read the exit map, and 80,000 more who never once looked up from the game. We drifted north on the current through that long night, and in the gray of the morning we made landfall on Bainbridge Island, which had come apart far less than the city had. Because an island is what every single one of us should have been thinking about from the very first buzz of the very first alert. Water is the fence that never lies, the one that can't be argued with or reasoned past or defeated with a factory default code. Marek and Inez and their 2 girls are with us still, all this time later. You don't stop being family with people after a night like the one we shared. It welds something that doesn't come apart. Desh is here. Carys still reads every map of everywhere we go. First thing before anything else, and I've stopped teasing her about it. And Teo is 18 now, and quiet still, quieter maybe, and he is the calmest human being I have ever known in a crisis. Steady as a stone when everything around him comes apart, and I hate, with a clean and total hatred, that I know exactly why he's like that. He learned it the night the city died, standing in the back seat and on the deck of a stranger's boat, watching his father decide who to save and who to leave in the black water, learning by watching the exact shape of what a man does when the systems all fail at once and the kind instincts we're all so proud of turn into knives in our hands. I still fix things. It turns out that's what I'm for. There's always a pump to coax back to life, an engine to talk into starting one more time, a generator to keep running one more day, a system somewhere that needs a man who understands how it breathes. It turns out that was enough, barely, by a foot, by a factory default code and a jerry can and a length of chain enough to get 5 people I love and 2 strangers off the edge of a dying city and onto the water. But I'll tell you the one thing I know now. The thing I did not know when I sat in that stadium with a warm beer in my hand and an unread alert glowing on my leg. The warning almost always comes in time. That is the terrible mercy of the whole thing, and it's the part I most need you to hear. The alert buzzed at the 35th minute. The news showed the empty crash at halftime. The gray helicopters crossed the open sky in plain sight of 80,000 people. The signs were all there, hours early, laid out clear and plain for anyone willing to stop cheering long enough to actually read them. The disaster is almost never that we get no warning. The disaster, the real one, the one that kills the 80,000, is that we get the warning and it arrives in the middle of something we love and don't want to leave. In the middle of a crowd that's certain everything is fine, and we tell ourselves it's just technical problems, just bad reception, just the thing we've all learned to ignore, and we sit back down and we stay for the winner. So if your phone ever buzzes with something that doesn't quite make sense, in the middle of something you love, in a crowd that's dead, sure everything is fine. I hope you're the one who stands up. I hope you're the weirdo climbing the stairs against the flow. I hope you walk against the current while it's still nothing but a bad feeling in your gut, and nothing at all has visibly gone wrong yet. You'll feel like an idiot if it turns out to be nothing. Good. Be the idiot. Feel foolish and embarrassed out in the parking lot with your family in the gold evening light, safe and stupid and alive. Because the only alternative, the one waiting on the other side of that choice, is to be one of 80,000 people, roaring at a scoreless game on the last good afternoon of the only world you've ever known. If this story stayed with you, sit with that question a while before you go. And then tell me down in the comments where you were listening from and whether you truly think you'd have stood up. When that alert first buzzed, I read every one of them. And I want to know. I need to know. Because I still can't tell if I was smart or just lucky. It was still 0-0. That's the part I can't ever put down. When it all began, when the whole world started to end, it was still 0-0. Nothing to nothing, everything still possible. And every single one of us, all 80,000, thought we had all the time in the world.